What if the cheapest product on the shelf was actually the most expensive thing your country ever bought? What if rock bottom prices were quietly dismantling entire industries, gutting middle class jobs, and setting the stage for a financial crisis nobody voted for? And what if the nation enabling all of this wasn't doing it by accident? Welcome to Untold Wealth Theory, where the numbers hide stories that most people never get to hear. There's a moment in economic history that almost nobody talks about. It happened quietly, in the space between a barcode and a price tag. It didn't look like a war. It didn't come with a declaration or a headline. It just felt like good news. Products getting cheaper, shelves getting fuller, and consumers getting more for less. That moment was the China price entering the global economy, and it changed everything. To understand how we got here, you need to go back to 2001. That's when China officially joined the World Trade Organization, the global club that governs how countries buy and sell from each other. Before that, trading with China was complicated, unpredictable, and expensive. After 2001, the floodgates opened. American retailers, European manufacturers, Japanese electronics brands, they all discovered the same thing almost simultaneously. You could make something in China for a fraction of what it cost anywhere else on Earth. At first it looked like a miracle. Walmart's shelves stocked faster. Consumer electronics got cheaper every single year. Clothes, tools, furniture, toys. The prices dropped so consistently that Americans started to expect it. Inflation on manufactured goods nearly flatlined. And economists called it a gift, a win for the consumer, a triumph of free trade. What they didn't say, at least not loudly, was what was being quietly traded away. Here's the thing about cheap. Cheap is seductive. Cheap is immediate. Cheap puts money back in your pocket today and hides the bill in a drawer you won't open for 20 years. The factories that closed in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan in the early 2000s, they didn't close overnight. They bled slowly. A few hundred jobs one quarter, a few hundred more the next. Plant managers kept hoping business would come back. It didn't. Between 2001 and 2011, the United States lost approximately 2.4 million manufacturing jobs, and economists at MIT later traced the majority of those losses directly to import competition from China. Not automation, not inefficiency. China. The China shock, as it became known in academic circles, was one of the largest and fastest labour market disruptions in American peacetime history. And it hit working class communities so hard that the damage is still visible in the data today, in wages, in life expectancy, in opioid death rates. But here's where the story gets darker, because it wasn't just jobs that were being lost. When a factory closes in a small town, it doesn't just take a paycheck with it. It takes the tax base that funds the school, it takes the diner that the workers ate at, it takes the mortgage payments that kept the local bank afloat. One factory closing triggers a cascade, and communities that got hit by the China shock often never fully recovered. Researchers found that in counties with high exposure to Chinese import competition, wages stayed suppressed for over a decade. The temporary adjustment that economists predicted never came. And this is the trap that nobody named clearly enough. If you're enjoying what you're learning here, hit subscribe. Untold Wealth Theory goes deep into the economic stories that shape the world, the ones that are still shaping it right now. Now let's zoom out. Because this isn't just an American story. China's export machine was built on a model that the world had never seen at quite this scale. It combined state-backed financing, undervalued currency, suppressed labour costs, and government subsidies so deep that private companies in other countries simply couldn't compete on price. It wasn't that Chinese workers were more productive. In many cases they weren't. It was that the Chinese state was effectively subsidising the difference between a fair market price and the price that showed up on your shelf. This is what economists call a structural distortion. And structural distortions don't correct themselves. They compound. Every year that a foreign factory couldn't compete, it lost market share. Every year it lost market share, it got harder to justify the investment in new machinery or new workers. The gap between China's scale and everybody else's kept widening, and the price kept dropping, and the trap kept closing. Here's the pattern break. Ready for the number that will reframe everything you just heard? China today produces more manufactured goods than the United States, Germany, Japan and South Korea combined. Not more than one of them, more than all four of them together. That's not a statistic about efficiency. That's a statistic about dependency. The global supply chain didn't just tilt toward China. For entire product categories, it became China. Semiconductors, solar panels, pharmaceuticals, rare earth minerals, the active ingredients in roughly 80% of antibiotics sold in the United States are manufactured in China or depend on Chinese-sourced precursors. Think about that the next time you fill a prescription. This is what the China trap really means. It's not just that industries moved overseas, it's that they moved overseas and then disappeared, along with the institutional knowledge, the engineering talent, the supplier networks and the infrastructure needed to bring them back. Once that knowledge walks out the door of a closed factory, it doesn't just sit in storage waiting to return. It evaporates. And now the world is trying to figure out what to do about it. The conversation started loudest in Washington, somewhere around 2017, when the Trump administration slapped tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods. The Biden administration kept most of those tariffs and added new ones. And in 2022, the CHIPS and Science Act pushed $52 billion into domestic semiconductor manufacturing, the first major attempt in a generation to rebuild an American industrial base from scratch. But rebuilding is brutally slow. Taiwan Semiconductor's new Arizona plant has faced repeated delays, skills shortages, and cost overruns. Intel's Ohio mega factory ran into similar issues. Because here's the uncomfortable reality: you can't just fund a factory back into existence. You need the engineers who know how to run it. You need the suppliers who know how to feed it. You need the workers trained specifically for it. All of that takes not years, but decades. Meanwhile, China isn't standing still. It's moving up the value chain, from cheap t-shirts to electric vehicles, to AI hardware, to advanced military components. The strategy was always long-term, and the countries that assumed the market would sort everything out are now realising at significant cost that some markets don't self-correct. Some markets get captured. Europe is learning this too. Germany's famous Mittelstand, the small and mid-sized industrial companies that made Germany the manufacturing heart of Europe, has spent the last decade watching Chinese competitors undercut their prices on everything from machinery to chemicals. Germany ran a trade surplus for most of its modern history. It's now managing an industrial identity crisis, with energy costs spiking after the Russia-Ukraine war and Chinese electric vehicles threatening the one sector, automobiles, that Germany still considered untouchable. The European Union launched its own anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese electric vehicles in 2023. They found subsidy levels so deep that Chinese EVs were arriving in European markets at prices that made no financial sense for a private company to charge. The only way the math worked was if a government was quietly covering the gap. That's not free trade. That's a state-backed market takeover dressed in the language of competition. So where does this leave us? The China trap isn't a conspiracy. It isn't a war crime. It's something more mundane and more dangerous. It's the predictable outcome of short-term thinking colliding with a long-term strategy. Consumers wanted cheap. Shareholders wanted margins. Politicians wanted smooth re-election cycles. And into that vacuum of long-term vision walked a state that had very clear goals and very long patience. The lesson buried in all of this isn't that trade is bad. It isn't that globalization was a mistake. It's that economic dependency is a vulnerability, and that when an entire civilization decides that the price on the tag is the only number that matters, it stops counting the costs that don't show up until much later. The price on the shelf was never really that low. We just agreed not to look at the full receipt. If this kind of economic history hits differently for you, if you felt it in your town, your industry, or your paycheck, drop it in the comments. What sector do you think is most at risk right now? The conversation there is always sharper than the one in the headlines. And if someone you know is still wondering why their manufacturing town never came back, or why certain goods cost what they cost, share this video with them. Not to alarm them, but because understanding the system is the first step toward not being trapped inside it.